wait for a few more minutes so that more people can join. So then we will start. Just wait
Okay.
for a few.
Okay.
Okay, let us start the normal proceeding of this talk. Welcome you all in the John Conway Spirited Seminar Series. This is going to be the last seminar for this semester. Afterward, we are going to have a break and we will resume during this semester, fall semester. Today, it's an honor for us and with immense pleasure, we are introducing our today's speaker. Our today's speaker is Professor Isaac Mulolani. He's working at the Center of Teaching and Learning, University of Regina, Canada. And Professor Mulolani has an interest on the use of open education practices to provide more adaptive and personalized learning and experience for students. Most recently, he has been interested in finding ways to deal with the under preparation level of students entering in higher education in North America. So he has worked in the foundation program with the students, helping them bridge the gap between the secondary school and higher education. He has been interested in the use of digital technologies to provide students with the interactive, engaging, and adaptive learning environment that help to reinforce reinforcement skill development. He is also the co-author of a textbook which is titled as Applied Vector Analysis. These are few things which are quite common with the developing countries where we do we don't have much of the resources to work on open educational practices, and perhaps we don't get the chance to have an interaction about the policy making on these kind of topics. So this is a unique talk of its own prospect, and I'm very excited to introduce our today's speaker, Isaac Milolani, who will be talking about very interesting thing based on his own experience, and particularly talking about open education practices in higher education, a game changer. Professor Mulolani, just to give you a background of it, we are not aware about these kind of practices in common. So bear us as a layman in this particular area. Over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Shahina and Dr. Mohammed. And it's an honor to be able to just share some of the things that I've been doing and we're doing here in Canada. I did see that when I was just going through one of the open educational sites, LibreText, actually has a map, a world map, and on the map it's got Pakistan listed there. So somewhere, and I believe one of the places is somewhere in Lahore. There's I can't remember what exactly it was, but
Virtual university probably.
no, it's LibreText. It's a repository for open textbooks. It's a
Oh,
free
okay, okay,
repository.
okay.
Yeah, that was interesting. I was just looking at that yesterday, actually, and I found that to be interesting. Now, I have shared my screen here, but I think I'm just going to stop a minute and I need it to be a little bit. Just give me 1 minute.
No issues.
Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Okay, so I titled my talk, Open Educational Practices in Higher Education, a Game Changer. And, okay, I'm gonna have to do this the hard way. So one of the things I'll start with is what are these open educational resources? And basically there are, as you will see, a bunch of different things, including open textbooks. So videos, audios, animations, presentations, syllabi, slides, and together you can say that they're open educational resources / open courseware, because these are some things that you use in courses. And why would we use those things? Why are they becoming more and more popular worldwide, actually? Well, one of the reasons is, well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. I'll just kind of go through some of them here. We're expanding access to learning, improving student learning, attracting students, showcasing the profile of an institution. And also when students come in, you want to convert those students, but prospective students, to be actual students. So that's one of the other things, adding value. One of the big issues in North America is cost savings. When you, I know there's a number of you, I looked at Lahore University's profile there, and I noticed there are a number of people that have been, even Dr. Bashir was educated in, took her doctorate with me in the University of Guelph. And one of the things we all are aware of is how expensive textbooks are, but even the education itself. In the United States, for example, it's not uncommon for 1 year to cost $50,000, just 1 year. And then on top of that, you got to pay for the books, right? So cost savings is a very big thing. Enhancing the quality is another issue. The other things that come into play is reducing faculty preparation time. Innovation is there, and then access to teaching and learning resources. Those are important aspects of the OER. Now, one of the big things about these resources is that the sharing is enabled by the licensing. So the licensing, I've just given you a chart here that shows the different types of licensing. This is the Creative Commons license. That's what CC stands for. So we've got public domain, which is this here. And then we've got all these other types of licenses. Now, there are two of them in both the, over here and here. You'll see that I've got a row where there are these X's all through the row, and also down the columns here. These, strictly speaking, with the equal sign here, these are not open educational resources. So there's 6 licenses, but 4 of them are open and 2 are not. So these 2 here are not. They're the same 2 here. So these generally are what you would put. You would create an open educational resource, whatever it may be, and then you would put one of these licenses on there. That would enable the sharing and remixing that other people will be able to do. So that's what makes it open. Now, I've got some examples here. In the University of Regina, they have created, in 2018, there was a faculty member that created a resource. And you can see this one here has that ND license. So this is not really open, if you adopt this, you can't really remix or change or adapt because of this ND, which means no derivatives. And this one here is another one that they completed in 2018. It also had the same license, this ND license. So it's not strictly speaking open in the sense of open that we're going to be talking about, but you can download it and use it and adapt it. And there's supplementary resources here. So PowerPoint slides, and then there's a video. And then the other two are actually what we would call open. So there's a financial empowerment for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And this is by the University of Regina. It's the First Nations University is part of the University of Regina, and they have supplementary resources here, PowerPoint slides and videos that you can use. And this particular resource is being used across Canada in different universities, not just the University of Regina. For example, I believe in Simon Fraser University last year, there was a faculty member who was using this resource, and she had, I believe, 300 students taking that course. In addition to that, there were the students at the University of Regina. There were probably, I don't know, 600 students. So those students did not have to pay for a textbook. They used this resource. So the resource sharing is really, really important. So here's another one, which is a nursing textbook that was also created back in 2018. And it's available. It's being used in the University of Regina, Saskatchewan Polytechnic. And also within the University of Saskatchewan, and right across Canada in different nursing schools. So, and this was the author here, the editor. She's she just retired actually. She's a nursing faculty member. But the way they created this resource was the chapters. I think there were about, I don't know, 16 or so chapters were actually all created by different authors across Canada in the nursing field. So that's another way that they can do it. And this is, of course, it's a CC BY license. So that means that any faculty or any nursing program across Canada or the US, it's also adopted in the US, that chooses to use this can take it, and they can also adapt it. They can make changes and adapt it to how they teach the content in their specific program. So this is true open. Then in December last year, with COVID on, we had a professor who decided that he wanted to have his students create a resource as one of their, as a final assessment piece in their course on history. So this resource is actually a book which has 9 chapters. Each one of the chapters is based on one of the student papers, and the professor is the editor. So it's basically co-creation with the students. And this is the Open Pedagogy project, one of them. We have another one currently being worked on right now from the winter semester. So this is another example of the use of open educational resources where students actually are involved in co-creation. Now, I'll speak specifically about the University of Regina. What we have right now, we have 14 open educational resources being developed currently, and I'll just sort of let you read through them. As you can see, they're across a range of different things. There's computer science, geology, economics, social work, physics. And we also have this spring, the 5 projects that I mentioned that we, actually there's 5 that were funded, and then there's a special project. So biomechanics, statistics, justice studies, that's an open pedagogy project, and then another geology project, and another Indigenous student project. And then we have something that's a special project where it's actually a second edition of a book on Indigenous women that have been missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's something that's an issue here in North America. So that book is being published and it's going to be released as an open resource so that it can go across Canada and anywhere else that people want to read about this. So this is just the University of Regina, but right across Canada, you'll notice, and I'm going to go to the next slide here. There are a lot of universities. In fact, every university is actually creating open educational resources. In some provinces, there's actually a group that sort of takes all of the universities within that, or post-secondary institutions within that province, and sort of has a place where they can house all of their resources. For example, the first one here, Atlantic Canada. So there's provinces in Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, Labrador, and they all kind of post all of their resources on this website. Now, they individually can have their own site as well, but they'll have this site. But faculty from all these areas are actually creating open educational resources. So if you go on their website here, you'll find they've created a substantial number. So if you think of this, in the University of Regina, we have 14. There's another university in Saskatchewan that's creating resources. Let's suppose they have about 10 resources going. And then you go across the 13 provinces and territories of Canada, very quickly you get quite a number of resources that are being developed every year in different areas. So I'll just go through and show you some of the areas that I've just drawn some of them here. So in Quebec, most of the resources being developed are in the French language. Concordia University is developing in English, so I've put that there. McGill also has English resources. In Ontario, there's a big grouping called eCampus Ontario, but individual universities in Ontario also have their own OER programs. And I'm not sure whether you all know, but I know Dr. Bashir knows this, in Ontario, the largest concentration of universities and colleges in Canada exists. There's 24 colleges and 22 universities. And all of those universities are involved in open educational resources, as are the colleges. So you have a fair amount of resources being developed in Ontario. And just this spring, the government of Ontario has funded, I think they gave $50 million to Ontario universities for the creation of virtual learning environments. And that includes open educational resource development. So there's a lot of work being done in Ontario just because of the sheer number of post-secondary institutions in that province. Then in Manitoba, there's Open Manitoba, which is, again, there's 4 universities in Manitoba, and they all kind of share their resources there, and also colleges there. We're in Saskatchewan, where we've got the University of Regina and the University of Saskatchewan. There's also, I think, Saskatchewan Polytechnic. I work there, and they also have an OER program, and they're developing resources there. We've got Alberta, which is on the other side of Saskatchewan, on the west coast as you go west, Open Alberta, and there's a bunch of universities there. University of Calgary is one of them. And if we go to British Columbia, we've got BC Campus, which is also the big body that houses all of the resources created in the province of British Columbia. And there's a bunch of universities and colleges, so 41 of them in British Columbia. So there's a lot of work in developing open educational resources in Canada happening. Now, I will talk about something called Open Courseware because I'm going to use it later on. And Open Courseware, when I defined open educational resources, I actually included Open Courseware. As you'll see here, it's lecture notes, syllabi, problem sets, solutions, reading lists, exams, video lectures, and even courses, right? Course content. So what you'll see is that if you go online to Wikipedia or the Open Courseware Consortium, they talk about it as free and open digital publication of high quality educational materials. And generally you organize them as courses. So there's a bunch of different places where you can get that. MIT Open Courseware is one that most people have heard of. And MIT, can't remember when, but they made all of their course content available to anybody around the world who has access to the internet. So if you go to their website, you can actually access the content that's used in their courses, and it's freely available to you. The only thing is, if you go through that content, nobody checks it because you don't have access to the faculty, but the content is there and it's under the Creative Commons license. So you can actually take the content and rework it and adapt it so you can reuse it in your specific context. Now, some of the tools for creating open educational resources, some of you are probably open source users. I know Dr. Bashir is an open source user, so some things here will be familiar. Other things like Office, most of us are familiar, we've used Office before. Anything that creates documents can be used to create open educational resources. So I've put here a bunch of different things. Some of them are open. So for example, LibreOffice, OpenOffice, and then SoftMaker, FreeOffice. These are all open source tools. And these others here are the SoftMaker Office and WP Office. These are proprietary, but cheaper than Office. They're alternatives to Office. And then of course, Google Docs, which is free, LaTeX and all its Lix and TechLive. These are LaTeX tools. Then there's something called Pressbooks, which is becoming increasingly popular. Actually, in Canada, most of the universities in Canada are using Pressbooks as one of the options for the creation of open educational resources. So at the University of Regina, I'm actually the administrator for the Pressbooks instance that we have. But faculty are also creating OER using LaTeX as well. So Pressbook just enables things, it's one, if they're going to create things using Word, then it's much quicker to create using Pressbooks. They can import Word into the Pressbooks and it's got a lot of things. So I put here LibreText, and LibreText, like I mentioned, is probably the largest online repository of OER, and it's a growing repository. They keep bringing in different resources. So these are the tools that you create, and then you can host your open educational resources so that other people can actually go in there and find them. So Pressbooks, for example, we post all of our content that we create in Pressbooks on Pressbooks. And then the Pressbooks allows a sharing right across the world. Anyone that uses Pressbooks can discover the content that we've created and made public in our Pressbooks instance through the Pressbooks directory. So now one of the big things that I did mention in my talk is that we actually are open educational resources are actually categories underneath open educational practices. And here are the categories. So open educational resources, which I've just been talking about. Then there is something called open pedagogy, which is where student co-creation is actually the main thrust. And I mentioned the history project in December, the fall semester that the history professor produced. That was an open pedagogy where the students were co-creating content and they became authors. That's becoming an increasingly popular direction in which the open educational practices are going. Then there's also open learning and open sharing, open scholarship, which we tend to call open access, where libraries actually have open journals that faculty can publish in, and then they provide access to those open journals and the resources that are there. Then open technologies. So for example, all the open source tools that you saw, those will be open technologies. So these are what are the game changers that I'm talking about. So the open sharing, open scholarship, the open learning, open pedagogy, and the open educational resources, because these right now are what are being pushed to the forefront. So I will just mention here, I picked up this definition from the Open University of Texas Library. They have this definition. I think the important part of this definition is that the products of open pedagogy are student created and openly licensed, and they live outside the classroom so that they can have wider impact to other people that are out there. So for example, other students or other classes, other courses at other institutions can reuse that content that the students are involved in creating, co-creating. So this is becoming more of a game changer, especially now with the pandemic. In North America, all of the universities, you probably heard this, closed down, and they had to find alternative ways to assess students. And open pedagogy was, for those that were in the open educational area and were familiar with that, they began to explore this and started doing this. So one of the ways in which some of the things that have been done is to create quizzes, create learning modules, to create books, as you've seen here. And these are the different elements of open pedagogy, which people are using. So just to highlight the top level, so peer review, reflective practice, of course, they're learner generated, community, connected community, so they're collaborative, sharing of ideas, innovation and creativity, people, openness and trust. What is interesting to me is that when we look at the employability skills, because that's the big issue, ultimately somebody comes into university or the college because they want to go out and get a job. So there is overlap between what we see here and the employability skills that we're trying to develop in the students, so that when they go out, they actually can be employed gainfully by whatever company that they choose. So I just listed here the attributes of open educational, open pedagogy here, but they're on that diagram. Now, I do have a couple of examples. One of the examples was the history project. That's an example from the University of Regina. It was completed in December, and the students were asked to write on different prime ministers of Canada. And so, like I said, 9 chapters in that book were written by the students on different chapters, and it specifically focused on speeches from the throne, because Canada is part of the Commonwealth and the Queen is sort of still connected to Canada. So there's always a speech from the throne during every one of these prime ministers' reign. So that's what they were writing about. Then most recently at the University of Saskatchewan, which is also in Saskatchewan, the students in one of the courses in I think it's a program for digital technology. It's a master's degree program. They took a course on, it's an actual open resource that was created down in the United States, and they took that resource and they adapted it for their course, and they worked on this book, and it's actually a book that they adapted, and it's an open educational resource that they then made available. So they made adaptations to that resource, and that was the students' project, working on that. A couple other ones that are more in the US, there's social work, something on families. There's, I think this is an English book. There's a whole range of different things that are, like I said, they're a lot of people, a lot of faculty are beginning to become a lot more creative in how they get the students to actually co-create content. And like I said, these resources are actually available. For example, you can go on to this University of Regina's Pressbooks website and actually read this book and download it and reuse it, right? All of these resources are reusable by anybody because they're all under a Creative Commons license, which is open. So I think these are all the open pedagogy. I just took a sampling of a few, but if you go to, for example, this resource here, this page, there's actually a whole series of different examples of open pedagogy projects that are being completed. And I think the most important thing about that is that students are actually co-creating with their faculty under the mentorship of their faculty in their particular areas, these resources, which is another, it's just kind of pushing beyond the idea that, they sit in the classroom and they kind of like, we cram open their brains and shove the knowledge into their brains. So it's sort of getting beyond that to the point where the students are now being asked to apply that knowledge and, create a resource. Now, the other thing that's becoming a big issue, we talked about cost savings for open educational resources. So what's becoming very big in North America, including in Canada here, is what we call Z-creds and Z degrees. And what that means is the students will go into a program where they do not pay any money for textbooks. So you read here the definition from BC Campus. They go into a program where in order to complete that credential in that program, they do not pay for any textbooks in any of the courses in the program. All the courses are either open or using free materials through the library. So whether it's open access materials, whether it's the journal articles and other free resources that the library maintains, or getting materials from the Open Educational Resources Commons, so open educational textbooks, right? These are growing. I'm currently in the University of Regina, and the University of Regina is actually, especially during COVID, one of the things, because the students, all the what do you call these, the bookstores in the universities right across Canada had to close, and also the colleges. They had to close the bookstores because the campus was closed. So the students could not buy textbooks. So what happened is that the library provided a listing of resources, links to open educational resources and other free open access materials. And that's, for the last year, that's where most faculty have been assigning readings from open educational resources or from the open access materials, whether it's journals or articles that are open access or open educational resource textbooks. And so this is now where it becomes more of a game changer because the cost becomes an issue. So I've listed a few things here. There's Kwantlen Polytechnic University is out in British Columbia, and they have 800 courses where students do not pay a single cent for books, textbooks. They pay their fees, but they do not pay for textbooks. And they actually have entire programs in their institution where the students are actually going in and getting a credential without paying for textbooks. They're using open textbooks or open access materials. Royal Roads has a Master of Arts in Learning and Technology, and also it's got a graduate diploma as well. And in those two programs, the people that go into those two programs do not pay for any of the textbooks. They use open access and open textbooks for their materials. So that's, like I said, that's becoming a growing trend in North America to deal with the costs in education. Now, I did mention about the issue of employability skills. So I thought I'd just mention what some of the skills are. These are not all of the skills, but these are some of the employability skills that have been identified. So problem solving, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity and innovation, lifelong learning, self-direction, and then local, global, and digital citizenship. So if you go back to what those facets of open pedagogy were, there is overlap, as you can see here, between the concepts in the open pedagogy where you get students co-creating and these skills, which is why more faculty are actually getting students to work on open pedagogy projects, because indirectly what's happening is the students are actually becoming more self-directed. they're engaging in collaboration. Of course, communication is part of all of that. And then they're thinking critically. You think of the students writing on the history project, they had some guiding framework to what they needed to cover in that. And then in different areas, it's problem solving, critical thinking, problem solving combined. And also everything, because they're creating digital resources, no students today can actually come out without being digital citizens. So that means using the tools, the digital tools that are out there, social media or open source tools, whatever it is that they need to create their open pedagogy project, they'll leverage those and then create that resource. While they're doing that, they're actually gaining the skills that they need for the workforce once they get out. Now, there's something else that I'm not sure about what Pakistan is doing in this regard, but there's something called competence-based education, which has been rising, especially in the United States, also in Europe. But in the United States, there's a very big move and push towards competence-based education. And the reasons why they're going towards that is because they're trying to service the non-traditional students. And also, there are a lot of people in the United States who've dropped out of school, and the government in the United States is trying to get more of those students to go back to school to complete their degrees, or whether it's a college or degree. They want completion. So competence-based education has actually come up as one way that they're doing this, right? So the other thing you see here is that the people in the industry have, I think in the 90s, late 90s and early 2000s, they were a little bit unhappy with the quality of the graduates. So one of the things that competence-based education does is that they work with the institutions that actually develop these competence-based education programs, work with industry to design the program. And the industry is a partner in the design of the programs, and the programs are actually constantly updated with what's going on in industry. So as there are changes in industry, then the programs themselves change. And one of the things that because you're talking about non-traditional learners, personalization of learning becomes important, because the non-traditional learner, these are adult learners, their way of learning is a little bit different from students coming directly from school. So one of the things that's coming out of that is they're getting a lot of people who are working professionals with families who are going back to school, because this strategy allows them to go back to school. It's flexible enough for them. So some of the elements of this, and for our interest in this talk, is that competence-based education programming leverages open educational resources and open courseware. So they're concerned with saving students, because like I said at the beginning of my talk, it's not uncommon for you to go to, let's say, an Ivy League school that costs you $50,000 and above for 1 year. So one of the things about competence-based programming is to reduce the costs, and also they've done a lot of different things. They're, of course, focused on employability. They're also focused on the development of self-direction. And also they're linked in with industry. So one of the things that they're concerned about is reducing the time to graduation, because they noticed that in the traditional system, students were spending 5 years in a 4-year program. And sometimes it's because they would switch from one program to the next. So they're looking at reducing the time. And so that's one of the things they've done in the design. But like I said, the main thing is that the majority of the competence-based education programs leverage open educational resources and open courseware in their design. And I'll just talk about some of the main the CBE program institutions that are out there. So for example, Western Governors University, it's one of the bigger ones. Their enrollment at the end of last year was 129,169 students. and their course, their programs are all online. So this is pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, the Western governors is actually all of the programming is online because it's flexible for people working professionals. So it has to be online. So they have 4 colleges with bachelor's and master's programming. So this is very, very big deal in the United States. They're one of the big hitters in competence-based education, because all of the programming in this institution is competence-based. Then there's University of Wisconsin, which is also a flexible option. They have different options here. There's the traditional option, then there's the competence-based option. This particular branch is the competence-based option. Then there's Southern New Hampshire, which is also one of the big competence-based education institutions in the United States. Worldwide, they have 170,000 students enrolling in their programs. They have 200 programs. They go right through the whole gamut, online, blended, face-to-face. So you take your pick. I mean, they're covering everybody, not just the non-traditional student, but even the regular students that come direct from high school. Then the last thing I'll talk about is when we all had to pivot in winter of 2020 last year, towards the end, the closure of the institutions, colleges and universities, and the pivot to remote teaching, faculty and students were forced into what we call here remote teaching. The majority of faculty in North America did not have experience teaching online, because it just, you go in the classroom and you teach, right? This traditional teaching. And even the use of blended learning, it was not that common. So most of the faculty had difficulty making that transition, because now all of a sudden you have to learn how to use Zoom. You have to learn how to use WebEx. You have to learn how to create electronic resources, because most of the time you just assign the textbook, the students bought the textbook, and then you just assign chapters in textbook, problems, and you give an exam in a lecture hall or in a big exam hall. Now all of that changed. So the push to go remote created problems with quality, but it also highlighted the need for 2 things. One is technology and the electronic resources that were out there. And so open educational resources had been growing in the 90s. It started growing quite a bit, early 2000s. So there was already a pre-existing large amount of open educational resources, more in some areas than others, but it already existed out there. And so other issues that came up was the internet connectivity, right? People had problems with going online because they didn't have, some people still had, slow internet at home or no internet. And so in some places across Canada and the US, they had, some institutions had to deal with the fact that students didn't have access to the internet and they needed it for remote instruction. I know in some places in the United States, they actually, I think there was some money spent to provide internet access to those that didn't have it. And also there was some money spent to provide laptops and computers to students that did not have computers at home. So that became another issue. But the main thing is that when we had to go remote, and this is, you think about this, in Canada, we have about 280 universities and colleges, and in the US it's close to 4,000. Every one of those closed, and everybody had to find electronic resources so students could keep learning. So that's a major, major shift. So from fall, winter of last year, one of the things that the institutions implemented in the summer leading up to the fall of last year, they provided technology supports, they brought in instructional design support, and then for the use of the learning management system where all of this online remote teaching was going, they provided support for that. The access issues are still ongoing, but now one of the big issues is just enabling faculty to find open educational resources or open access materials so that they can use those in their courses. So that was a very big issue in the summer of last year. The libraries across North America and open educational resource programs were involved in helping faculty find the resources for the fall 2020-21, that academic year. So, and then also one of the things that began to become an issue is, okay, we need tools, technology tools. So there's a number of institutions that began using a lot of the open educational resources that are out there in the, from the open source community. Because again, the bookstores were still closed. Even right now, the bookstores are closed to students going in to buy. They can't actually go in to buy a textbook, right? So they're still closed. So even for fall of 2021, this coming fall, many of the faculty are actually looking at open resources, open textbooks, and open access materials to assign for their courses. So one of the things that myself and the library and libraries right across, people like me and libraries right across North America are doing is putting together lists right across subject domains of all the open access and open textbooks that are available so that faculty can come in and say, oh, okay, I can use this psychology textbook and assign this in my course. And if I need to, I can adapt it so that it covers what I need in my class. So this is one of the things that we're doing for the fall coming up. But the biggest thing I would say is the change of faculty right across subject areas to the delivery, online delivery. Faculty right across subject domains have understood that actually delivering things online is actually a good idea. A major change, massive change. I'm a mathematician by training, and when I was teaching in South Poly from 2011 to 2019, I kept asking, the program head, I said, well, the department head, I said, we need to have some of our programming online so that students can access it and we can provide remedial instruction through the online means. And the constant conversation ended with the same thing. We can't teach math online. And at the time, of course, math was being taught online at other institutions anyway. We have a university in Alberta called Athabasca University. It's always been an online university, and math is one of the subjects that they teach online at that university. We also have the University of Waterloo in Ontario that always had math being taught online, as well as a lot of other areas being taught online. So right now, what we've seen across North America is that most of the faculty have really had a paradigm shift from we can't teach this online to, well, we have to teach it online. And now it's a shift to saying, well, you know what, maybe a significant amount of our content, we should possibly consider at least being blended in our approach to instruction and leveraging, open resources, not just thinking about just, publisher-based textbooks, which are the cost of publisher-based textbooks keeps increasing. And, what we've noticed is there's been research done to see that the impact of open educational resources on student performance. And one of the things that they've found is that the use of open textbooks allows students to perform as well as, and if not better than, when they use publisher-based textbooks. And in some cases, they perform better because essentially the faculty are able to design the textbook, tailor it to the actual course that they're delivering. I would teach a course in math where we had 30 chapters, and we would only use maybe 15 of those chapters. And it would not be 15 consecutive chapters. It would be 15, chapters that we'd pull out of that textbook. But with an open textbook, you can actually get the textbook and design it to have exactly what you're going to cover in your class for your students. So there's a focus on that, which means that the faculty member has more control over what is in the book itself, right? So one of the things that we're hearing about right across North America is that a lot of institutions are actually rethinking the idea of having just face-to-face delivery. There's many of them that are saying, well, I think most of our program, and this is driven by students. When I say the change, there's an attitude change. It's not just faculty, it's also students. Students have actually seen that, well, you know what? If I can learn online, it provides me with a more flexible way to learn. So programming from the institution side, they're beginning to see that, well, maybe there is some savings to be had if we go and do blended. We can actually, we can do this blended thing and leverage technology, leverage open educational resources. We could move courses online. We can take some of the courses, put them online, and increase our enrollments that way. That's, of course, when you talk increasing enrollments, the university sits up and says, of course, yes, we want to do that. So that's becoming one of the things that we're hearing. And also, a lot of departments are beginning to adopt and look to open courseware and open educational resources, which includes open textbooks. For example, on Friday this week, I have a meeting with the dean of a college who is looking to move all of the programming in his area to open textbooks. They want to use open textbooks so that they can reduce the cost for students. The math and statistics department in the University of Regina, the program head in December spoke to me and he said, by the fall of 2021, which is this fall, we want to try to have all of our courses in our department using open textbooks. So this move, and the other thing he's actually looking at is he wants to use open source assessment tools in the long term. So this is open technologies now. So the alternative assessment, I mentioned that the open educational practices is another thing that's happening right now. From the winter semester, we have a justice studies professor who he actually had the students create an open textbook, and they are actually writing the chapters of that textbook are written by the students, right? The chapters. And that's a resource that's going to be refined in an ongoing manner. So the key thing to note is that an open textbook is not ever complete. Like you have a first iteration and then it keeps being iterated. And then as it's adopted and refined, remixed, that becomes the next iteration for an adaptation for that particular person. So this particular justice studies faculty member, his idea is that the resource that he will release at the end, somewhere in June, July, will be the first iteration, and then there'll be a continual iteration of that to refine it further for students that come into that course, because that course does not have a textbook that they can use. So the resource that the students develop will be the basis for the textbook, the next delivery. And again, the students will refine that further. So, and again, I mentioned leveraging open source use. And then one of the things that faculty universities right across North America, universities and colleges right across North America are beginning to realize is that they need to bring in instructional design expertise so that faculty, because faculty are subject matter experts, and they need the help when you're talking about using learning management systems to, design learning, whether it's in a blend or online. They need help with that. So, they focus on their part, and then the instructional design expertise is brought to bear to help them design a quality course, whether it's a blended course or an online course. So instructional design expertise is being elevated to a higher level in universities and colleges across North America. And then we're seeing more collaborations across institutions, especially when it comes to online. There's more of a sharing, a willingness to share online courses across institutions. So, you have some institutions that have been further along the game of delivering online courses. And so those are they're sort of being partnered with other institutions that want to reuse some of that. So there are collaborations in that regard, which is good because there's less funding coming from the government to actually deal with, like if you have to start from scratch, you have to invest a bit of money to go online and do blended. If you don't have the technologies there, you have to bring them in. That's money. But if you can partner with somebody, then that becomes another institution or other institutions, then that becomes more of a game changer for you. And that's what's happening in the provinces in Canada. For example, eCampus Alberta, eCampus Ontario, and the Atlantic provinces. They're actually collaborations of all the institutions. And it's not just in developing OER, but it's also with the online and blended, all of those, and the sharing of, expertise as well, like open sharing, those collaborations. So that's what's happening in Canada and the US in terms of these open educational practices.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for a very detailed descriptive talk on open education. Anyone from the audience come up with some questions?
There is a,
Uh,
oh,
yeah, there is a question in the chat box.
yes. So one of the things with the open educational resources and the open courseware, because they're courseware, they're more flexible in terms of the quality, because it's up to the individual that's going to reuse the courseware to actually decide on whether it's of the right quality. But the open educational resources, one of the things that in the development of the open educational resources, there are quality rubrics that we can use. And then also one of the things that we do is if it's an open textbook, there is a peer review of the textbook that we put that through. So there's, for example, we have a textbook, those textbooks that I listed that are in development right now, before those will be completed, we will put them through a review of peers. Other faculty from other institutions will review those and send their comments to the faculty that have designed that particular open textbook. And then they'll implement those changes, much like what you do with journal papers, same thing.
And are there some agencies which provide these kind of consultancy in order to streamline this OCW peer review and these kind of thing?
No, this is a peer review. Will, like, for example, for me as the manager of the Open Educational Resources program in the University of Regina, I will actually identify, I will approach faculty in the subject area of the resource that we're talking about and in other institutions, and we'll provide them with an honorarium for doing a peer review for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be the ones that will go out and find the faculty in that area to do a peer review, give them honorarium, and then comes back and we go and release that particular resource after that book after the review has gone through, which is similar to what is done in the textbook industry. When you design a textbook, that's what they do. They will actually send your textbook proofs to some other people to review, and they'll send you comments. Same thing. It's the same thing.
And what about the satellite campuses? Do this particular project cover that particular thing? For instance, there are big university, if one talk about the University of Ontario
Yeah.
or other UBC. So
Yeah.
are there whether this online services do cover some, like you are talking about e-campuses?
Right.
So similarly, are there satellite campuses in the sense where their house a short degree program where degrees being issued?
Yeah. So, well, I'll answer your question this way. In Ontario, for example, the eCampus Ontario, they focus on the bringing together the OER creation, as well as some other things connected to connecting the universities and colleges together. But
Mm-hmm.
then in Ontario, there is something called Ontario Learn. And Ontario
Mm-hmm.
Learn is a conglomeration of all of the colleges in Ontario, and they offer certificate and diploma programming, common
Mm-hmm.
programming that you can take through that online portal. It's an online portal. You go in through, let's say, one of the colleges in Ontario, but the delivery of that will be through Ontario Learn, which is
Mm-hmm.
central, it's an LMS. You go in, you
Oh.
sign up through a college, but you're actually going to get that course delivered through the Ontario Learn website
Mm-hmm.
to avoid duplication. Because like I said, there are 24 colleges in Ontario. Now, when you go in, there's an instructional design certificate, for example, that you can take
Mm-hmm.
through any of the colleges in Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual courses are delivered through Ontario Learn so that
Mm-hmm.
there's no duplication. So when you're talking about satellite campuses, some of the universities have satellite campuses, like the University of Regina has some satellite campuses. They call them federated colleges. They actually have access to the same resources that
Mm-hmm.
that the university creates. They can access them electronically and give them to their students as well, which is what actually on Friday my conversation with the dean I mentioned is he's actually the dean of a satellite campus. So
Mm-hmm.
he's looking to actually leverage these open educational resources or slash open courseware that we've identified. So they're going to be able to get access to any of the resources that we've identified.
Mhm. In fact, if we look at the open resources, we think of Coursera as a benchmark. You can say resource online courses from where one can pick the online courses and online thing. But definitely the resources when it come to the resources, the book and these kind of things, these practices are not very much common in third world countries like Pakistan. So
Yeah, but I
because
do.
one of the issue one way or the other it is linked with the emoluments. So the students are definitely students and even faculty, they are already uh, dealing with a lot of duties, and somehow one way or the other one is concerned about how much emolument one gets if the project is being done. So you did mention that all these projects were funded, right, where the students were contributed.
Actually, the one which was on the Prime Ministers of Canada,
Yeah.
the history open pedagogy, that project was not a funded project. It was actually the faculty member. What he would do in a regular year, he would actually have his students present at conferences. Now the
Mhm.
problem was everything was shut, so he wanted an alternative. So his project was not funded, and not all open textbook projects are funded. For example, I actually created open textbooks when I was teaching, but they were not funded. I did
Mhm.
create some funded ones, but not
Mhm.
all open textbook projects are funded. There are faculty, especially those that are open source users, who
Mhm.
create open textbooks as part of what they believe is, because they believe that, they don't believe in selling the knowledge because they feel it's open. It's in the open, should be in the public domain. So
Mhm. Mhm.
such faculty have created their content based on the idea that they want it to be open and freely shareable and adaptable by anybody at any other institution. There's quite a number of such faculty, especially here in North America.
Mhm. And what about the ACT testing in placed in these open resources? Because many of the colleges in United States and Canada, they are mainly focused on the ACT training in mathematics. If one talks about mathematics.
Yeah, in math, no, actually, the ACT is not as big. The standardized training it's fallen out a little bit in North America. So
Uh-huh.
if you're trying to go, like when I first came to Canada, I came to Canada in 1990, and when I first came here and I was looking at the United States and all of that, you needed to, if you're going to an undergrad program, they would have
Yeah.
ACTs, and
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
graduate programs, there's GMAT and GRE and all of this.
In
But
fact,
if you,
putting this particular question is of a particular interest because on one
mhm,
side, ACT is pushing everyone toward building resources which are paid, right?
right,
And on the other side, there is this open resources, what you are talking about, open
right,
education. And this is completely in contrast to the ACT approach. But
right.
on mathematical ground, ACT has gained a lot of confidence in United States and Canada, where people do believe that ACT training really come into play in critical thinking and mathematical problem solving and these kind of things. So how to cope up with okay,
Well,
providing the ACT training for free or something?
well, here, what we're seeing in North America is, and unfortunately, what's happened is that the school system here has become, well, it's kind of fallen behind. So in the universities and the colleges, what has happened is that there has become a need for remediation for the students coming into the post-secondary, whether you're talking about college or the university, because they're coming out of the same post-secondary institution, secondary institutions, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
What we're finding is that the students come in underprepared for college and university. So remediation has become a big part of what has to be preloaded in their post-secondary experience. So if you go to Ontario, I can't remember exactly what the year was, but Ontario has a province-wide, um, what they call it, bridging program that the
Mhm.
government of Ontario pays for because they noticed that there is this growing gap between the students coming in, where they were coming in, and where the post-secondary institutions expected them to be. So that bridging program allows them to take 1 year and bring their levels up. And then they can take the certificate that they get out of that program and apply with their high school uh, diploma to a college or university program. That's become an issue in across North America, and this is it's a big problem. That's why they had what the I think it was called No Child Left Behind in the U.S. under Obama, and they changed it to something else. It was there under the Bush's administration. The whole purpose of that was because they were having performance issues once the students got into college and university. So ACTs and SATs are not as big as they used to be because like we have the students coming into post-secondary with these 90 averages, but then when you sit down and give them something to write, they were having difficulty being able to write. The mathematics was a problem. They didn't know the algebra that they needed to know. So you couldn't just start with calculus in the college or university anymore because they had problems with the algebra now. So the SAT and all the ACTs, they're not as big as they used to be. There is something called there's something that they used to use. I can't remember the name of it. Um, it was a testing thing that they would take when they would come into the university. That's still used. Oh, I can't remember. There's a name. It's not SAT or ACT. It's something else. It's just to test the level of the students, and I'm not sure exactly what it's called. I've forgotten. That is still used today, but ACTs and SATs are not. They're not a good indicator. Was there any other question?
Hello,
Hello.
I
Yes,
think Doctor.
let me put one more question to you. When you talk about open course, and the question I actually put earlier was regarding framework stuff. So you said there was a blueprint regarding it. So can you share that where one can actually have follow those blueprints or stuff like that?
For Open Courseware or for open educational resources,
Yeah.
in fact, there are different rubrics, like there are different open educational resource bodies that have different rubrics. Usually what happens in the open community is that we will actually use the same rubrics and just kind of tweak them to our liking. So in different, like I have a rubric where we're looking at different, we want resources to be accessible. So accessibility is on there. And then there are different quality aspects. So, you're looking at whether the coverage is okay and that kind of thing. So BC Campus actually has a rubric that many of us actually use. And it's basically talking about the, different elements of quality that we need the resource to have. So one of the things we want faculty to do is actually look at that. The other thing we do is we provide them with a toolkit. For that toolkit to go through accessibility issues, what they should take care of, like some of the accessibility issues that here in Canada and the US, accessibility is becoming, it's something that they have to implement. In the US, there's ADA, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but institutions have been sued over not providing accessible content. So that's a very big deal. ADA is actually something that's taken a lot of institutions to court. So they have to take care of those accessibility issues for students with different accessibility issues, right? So, but there's also, making sure that the coverage is complete. So it just depends on the particular resource. Like I personally use the one that's from BC Campus because it meets all the criteria that we need our resources to meet.
Because my question was actually also from that aspect. When you talk about content, so we do have a diverse background education in Pakistan. So some people are very well educated, some are coming from rural areas, and not everybody is familiar with the ICT content or internet content.
Right.
So do you think by creating this open coursework, so people that are not really familiar with the, let's say, information technology, are they at some impairment or are they at some loss, or do you think they can make it up?
Well, if you're like, for example, let's suppose you have like some kind of a literacy program that you're trying to develop content for, you can actually develop the content and make sure that it meets the needs based on where the target audience that you have are coming from. So if they're not, and I noticed that this is being done in Africa, in parts of Africa, they're doing this. They're actually tailoring the resources that they're using and creating for their audience. So if they don't have access to the internet, then the resources will be physical resources. They'll make them open and then have them as printed resources, right? So you can adapt what you're creating to your target audience. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, I'm thinking going by that approach, the coursework a little stretches out a little bit.
Yeah, so you can like for both Open Courseware and the open educational resources, you can actually, like if it's just a literacy program, you can, because you know who your target audience is, then you'll design your content so that it meets the needs of those particular learners. If it's just a literacy, then you put it at that level where they will be at. If it's more than that, then you put it at the level that they'll be at. So your audience determines how you're going to design and what you design.
So the quality will be different for different courses.
Right, and that's exactly the situation. Like for example, I took some courseware from BC Campus that was a calculus course. They have 4 textbooks that they created in the BC University of British Columbia in calculus. I actually took the content from there, but when I was teaching in Saskatchewan Polytechnic, the level of the students it's not a university level. So what I had to do is I had to actually take the content and remove some of the content, reduce the level so that my students could access the content in that text.
Is there any other question from the audience? If not, then I would like to thank Professor Isaac Mulolani for this wonderful talk. Thank you so much for sharing your early morning time and your invaluable knowledge and expertise. Thank you. It was very nice.
Thank you. Did you want me to send you a copy?
Please, please.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Allah Hafiz. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.